David Hartley slammed his calloused hand flat onto the supply counter hard enough to rattle the coffee cup beside it, and locked eyes with the smirking young lieutenant who'd just called his uniform a Halloween costume. The room went dead silent. David didn't shout. He didn't move. He just stared, jaw tight, the muscle in his cheek twitching, like a man holding back 20 years of buried thunder. "Son," he said quietly, "you have no idea what you just did." What that lieutenant didn't know, what nobody in that depot knew, was that in less than 10 minutes, a brigadier general would walk through those doors and salute the man they'd been laughing at. If you're watching from somewhere in the United States right now, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe respect is something you earn, not something you demand, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the end. Because what David Hartley does next will give you chills. The bell above the door of the Fort Carson Supply Depot jingled once soft and ordinary, the way it had jingled 10,000 times before. But the man who walked through it that Tuesday morning was anything but ordinary, even if nobody in the building knew it yet. David Hartley was 46 years old, 6'1", lean in the shoulders, gray creeping in at his temples like frost on a fence post. He wore faded olive drab fatigues, the kind you couldn't buy anymore at any surplus store, because the military had quietly retired that exact pattern back in 2008. The trousers were bloused into a pair of scuffed combat boots that had walked across 3 continents. On his left sleeve, just below the shoulder seam, sat a small embroidered patch most civilians would have mistaken for a generic army emblem. It wasn't generic, not even close. David didn't notice the 4 young lieutenants standing near the ammunition crates by the window. He wasn't the kind of man who scanned a room for threats anymore. At least, that's what he told himself most mornings. He'd come here to drop off paperwork. That was it. A simple volunteer logistics gig. 20 hours a week helping coordinate equipment transfers for the local reserve unit. The pay was barely gas money, but his 8-year-old daughter Lily had started asking why Daddy didn't have a real job like the other kids' fathers, and David had decided that any job was better than no job. He walked up to the counter, set down a manila folder, and waited. Behind the counter stood a kid named Specialist Reyes, 22 years old, fresh-faced, polite. Reyes glanced up, smiled the practiced smile of a man who'd been trained to be helpful, and said, "Morning, sir. How can I help you?" "Volunteer paperwork," David said. His voice was low steady. "Hartley, they told me to drop it off here." "Sure thing. Let me grab the intake clipboard." That's when the first laugh came. It was sharp, a single bark of a laugh, the kind that travels across a quiet room like a stone skipping on water. David didn't turn his head. He'd heard that kind of laugh before. In barracks. In bars. In hospital waiting rooms after he'd come home from his 3rd deployment and didn't quite know how to talk to people anymore. He kept his eyes on the clipboard, but the laugh wasn't done with him yet. "Hey, Bryson, check this guy out." The voice belonged to one of the lieutenants, a tall blonde kid, maybe 26, with the kind of jawline that belonged on a recruiting poster and the kind of mouth that had clearly never been punched. "What about him?" said the second voice, Bryson apparently, shorter, stockier, the sort of officer who laughed at everything his buddy said because his buddy had outranked him by 2 weeks. "Look at the uniform, dude. Is that a costume?" A snicker. Then another. David's hand, the one resting on the counter, slowly curled into a loose fist. Not tight, not aggressive, just present, like a man reminding his body that it still belonged to him. Specialist Reyes glanced up nervously, his eyes flicking from David to the lieutenants and back again. He'd seen this kind of moment before, old vets coming in getting laughed at by kids who'd never heard a real shot fired in anger, and he hated it every single time. "Sir," Reyes said quietly, sliding the clipboard across. "If you could just fill in." "I got it, son," David said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. There was something in it, a kind of stillness that made Reyes go quiet immediately. Behind David, the lieutenants weren't done. "Seriously, though, the blonde one said loud enough to carry. "Where do you even get a uniform like that, Spirit Halloween?" "Maybe his grandkids playing soldier," Bryson said, and the four of them broke into laughter. David picked up the pen. He started writing his name. David. R. Hartley. The R was for Robert, after his father who'd come home from Vietnam and never spoken about it once, not even on his deathbed. "Hey, old-timer," the blonde lieutenant called out. "Don't take it personal. We're just messing with you. Where'd you serve Korea World War II?" More laughter. David's pen stopped moving. For about 3 seconds, he didn't write. He didn't breathe. He didn't even blink. Specialist Reyes, watching him from 2 feet away, saw something pass across David's face that he would later describe to his fiancée as the scariest calm I've ever seen on a human being. Then David started writing again. Calm. Steady. Letter by letter. He wasn't going to give them what they wanted. He'd promised himself a long time ago that he wasn't going to be that guy anymore. The guy who lost his temper. The guy who broke things. The guy who came home from Kandahar and put his fist through the bedroom wall the first night because his wife had moved the furniture and he didn't recognize his own house in the dark. That was a different David Hartley. That David had buried himself slowly year by year in school plays and PTA meetings and packed lunches with crustless sandwiches because Lily didn't like the crusts. This David was just a man dropping off paperwork. He was almost done with the form when a fifth voice joined in. Older, smoother, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who'd grown up giving orders instead of receiving them. "Gentlemen, what's so funny?" The laughter stopped instantly. Boots clicked. Postures straightened. David didn't have to turn around to know what had just walked into the room. He could feel it in the air, the way the temperature shifted when someone with real authority entered a space full of pretenders. "Sir," the blonde lieutenant said, snapping a half-decent salute. "Nothing, sir. Just an old vet came in. We were having a laugh." "A laugh," the older voice repeated. Flat. Dangerous. "Yes, sir. At what exactly, Lieutenant Carver?" David kept writing. He could see out of the corner of his eye the older man, a colonel by the looks of his shoulder boards, mid-50s, silver hair cropped close, standing in the doorway with his hands clasped behind his back. "His uniform, sir, it's outdated." "Outdated." "Yes, sir." The colonel walked further into the room. His boots made a particular sound on the linoleum. The slow, deliberate sound of a man who never had to hurry anywhere in his life. David finished the last line of the form and slid it across the counter to Reyes. "Done," he said quietly. "Thanks for your help, Specialist." Reyes looked at the form. Then he looked back up at David. Then he looked at the patch on David's sleeve. And his face went white. David didn't notice. He turned to leave. "Excuse me, sir." It was the colonel. David stopped. He turned slowly and met the older man's eyes. They were gray, sharp, curious in a way that had nothing to do with mockery. "Yes, sir," David said. "That patch on your sleeve. May I ask what unit?" For a moment, just a moment, David hesitated. He'd worn this uniform deliberately. Not out of pride, not out of nostalgia. He'd worn it because every other uniform he owned had been outgrown, donated or torn up for shop rags years ago, and this was the one his daughter had asked to see when she'd said, "Daddy, can I ask you a question?" At school they said soldiers are heroes. Were you a hero? Bampunta. He hadn't known how to answer her. So he'd done what he always did when words failed him. He'd shown her instead. Pulled the uniform out of the cedar chest, let her run her fingers over the patches. Let her ask questions he couldn't quite answer. And then this morning, when he'd been getting dressed for the volunteer paperwork, Lily had looked up from her cereal and said, "Daddy, wear the special clothes, the ones with the pictures." He hadn't been able to say no to her. 519 Echo, sir, David said. The colonel didn't move, didn't blink. The four lieutenants behind him exchanged glances. The blonde one, Carver gave a small, awkward laugh. 519 Echo, never heard of it. That a reserve unit old-timer? The colonel turned his head very slowly and looked at Lieutenant Carver. Carver's smile died on his face. Lieutenant, the colonel said, his voice dropping to a register so quiet that everyone in the room had to lean in slightly to hear it. Do you know what 519 Echo is? No, sir. Not specifically. Then I would suggest very strongly that you stop talking. Right now. Carver's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Sir, with respect, I don't see what... That wasn't a request, Lieutenant. That was an order. Carver shut his mouth. The colonel turned back to David. And then slowly, deliberately, he did something that made every single person in that supply depot stop breathing. He came to attention. And he saluted. Not the casual, half-hearted salute the lieutenants had been throwing around. Not the textbook salute they'd practiced at the academy. A real salute. The kind a man gives when he means it. Sharp, precise, eyes locked forward. Held a full 3 seconds longer than regulation required. David, without thinking, without hesitating, returned it. His hand came up, snapped to his brow, dropped clean. For a second, nobody in the room moved. Then the colonel said quietly, "Welcome to Fort Carson, Sergeant First Class. It's an honor." The silence that followed was the loudest silence David had heard in 20 years. Lieutenant Carver was staring. His mouth was slightly open. The other 3 lieutenants had gone pale and stiff like statues someone had forgotten to dust. Specialist Reyes was looking back and forth between David and the colonel like a man watching a tennis match in slow motion. David cleared his throat. He didn't know what to say. So he said the only thing that felt true. "Thank you, sir. I'm just here to drop off some paperwork." The colonel almost smiled. "Of course." David nodded once, picked up his copy of the form from the counter, and turned to leave. He could feel 4 pairs of eyes on his back as he walked toward the door. He could feel them burning right between his shoulder blades. He didn't turn around. But just before he reached the door, he heard Lieutenant Carver's voice, small now, uncertain, stripped of its swagger. "Sir, with respect, sir, what is 519 Echo?" The colonel didn't answer right away. David paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He shouldn't have stopped. He should have kept walking. But 22 years of military instinct made him hold still and listen. "Lieutenant Carver," the colonel said, 519 Echo Response is a unit that doesn't officially exist. Their files are sealed. Their operations are classified at a level you don't have clearance to even hear about. The men and women who served in that unit between 2003 and 2014 were responsible for, among other things, the extraction of 17 American hostages from territories I'm not at liberty to name. Their commanding officer, Sergeant First Class David Hartley, was awarded the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and a Distinguished Service Cross. A pause. The Distinguished Service Cross Lieutenant is the second highest military decoration the United States Army can bestow. It is awarded for extraordinary heroism in the face of an armed enemy. There are currently fewer than 300 living recipients. Another pause. "And you just called his uniform a costume." David's hand tightened on the door handle. He hadn't told anyone any of that. Not his ex-wife, not his daughter, not the men he played poker with on Thursday nights. He'd buried it, all of it, because that wasn't him anymore. That was a different person, in a different country, in a different lifetime. Behind him, Lieutenant Carver said very quietly, "Sir, I didn't know." "I'm aware you didn't know, Lieutenant. That's the entire problem." "Sir, I'd like to apologize." "Then I would suggest you do it before he walks out that door." David heard footsteps behind him. Hesitant. Measured. The footsteps of a man who'd gone from cocky to terrified in the span of about 90 seconds. "Sergeant First Class Hartley." David turned. Lieutenant Carver was standing about 6 feet away, his hands at his sides, his face as red as a stoplight. He was a kid. That's what struck David first. A kid. 26 maybe, just out of officer training. Probably hadn't deployed yet. Probably wouldn't deploy ever the way the world was going. He'd been a kid like that once. Sergeant First Class Hartley. Carver said, his voice tight. I owe you an apology. What I said was disrespectful. It was ignorant. I had no right. I'm sorry, sir. David looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. He smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It wasn't a forgiving smile. It was a small, tired, sad kind of smile. The smile of a man who'd seen a lot of young men get themselves killed because they didn't know what they didn't know. Lieutenant, David said quietly. You ever serve overseas? No, sir. Not yet. Anybody in your family? My grandfather. Korea. You ever ask him what he did over there? Carver swallowed. He never talked about it. He passed when I was 12. David nodded slowly. Most of us don't talk about it, son. Not because we don't remember. Because we remember too much. He let that hang in the air for a second. Then he extended his hand. Carver stared at it. Then he took it. His grip was firm. He was trying. David could feel him trying not to let his hand shake. Apology accepted, Lieutenant. Just remember what happened today. Next time you see an old guy in faded gear, maybe ask his name before you crack a joke. Yes, sir, I will. I promise, sir. David nodded, released his hand, and turned back toward the door. But the colonel wasn't done yet. Sergeant First Class, before you go, may I ask why you're volunteering for logistics? David paused. Sir, a man with your record could walk into any defense contractor in this country and write his own ticket. 6 figures easy. Why are you here filling out paperwork for 20 hours a week of unpaid coordination work? David was quiet for a moment. Sir, he finally said, I have a daughter. She's 8. Her name's Lily. Her mother passed 2 years ago. Breast cancer, caught it too late. It's just me and her now. The colonel's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry to hear that, Sergeant. Thank you, sir. The thing is, Lily, she asked me last month if soldiers were heroes. I didn't know what to say, so I told her I'd find a way to show her. I'm not looking for a contract, sir. I'm not looking for money. I just want my daughter to see her dad doing something that matters again, even if it's just paperwork. The colonel didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, What's your phone number, Sergeant? Sir. What's your phone number? I'd like to call you. There's someone I want you to meet. David hesitated. Then he gave it. The colonel wrote it down on a small notepad he produced from his breast pocket. He clicked the pen shut, slipped it back into place, and looked up. Drive safe, Sergeant. We'll be in touch. David nodded once, walked out the door. The bell jingled softly behind him. He stood in the parking lot for almost a full minute before he could move. The morning sun was bright. The sky was clear. A hawk was circling overhead, riding a thermal up from the prairie. Somewhere far off, a flag was snapping in the wind. He walked to his truck, a 2005 Chevy Silverado, with a bad transmission and a lily-painted handprint on the passenger door, and got in. He sat there with his hands on the wheel for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and texted his daughter's babysitter, "Running a little late. Tell Lily I love her." He started the engine. Inside the depot, the colonel was looking at Lieutenant Carver with the kind of expression that made grown men reconsider their career choices. Carver. Yes, sir. You're going to write me a 5,000-word paper, single-spaced, by Friday. Yes, sir. On what topic, sir? On the history of 519 Echo Response. Everything that's been declassified. Every name, every operation, every single person who died serving in that unit. By Friday, I want you to know more about that man's life than he does." "Yes, sir." "And Carver." "Sir. If you ever disrespect another veteran in my presence again, I will personally make sure your military career consists of exactly one assignment in exactly one location, and that location will be a place so cold and so remote that the only thing keeping you company will be your regret. Are we clear, Lieutenant?" "Crystal clear, sir." "Dismissed." The four lieutenants filed out of the depot in absolute silence. Specialist Reyes, still standing behind the counter with his mouth slightly open, watched them go. The colonel turned to him. "Specialist, what's your name?" "Reyes, sir. Daniel Reyes." "Specialist Reyes, that paperwork the sergeant just filled out. I want you to do something for me." "Anything, sir. I want you to file it, properly. Make sure it gets to the right desk. And if anybody gives that man a hard time about anything while he's working here, I want to hear about it. Personally. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir. Crystal clear, sir." The colonel nodded. He glanced once more at the door David had just walked through. Then he walked out himself, leaving Specialist Reyes alone in the suddenly very quiet supply depot. Reyes looked down at the form on the counter. David R. Hartley. Sergeant First Class Retired. 519, Echo Response. He stared at it for a long time. Then he picked up the form very carefully, like it was something precious, and he walked it to the filing cabinet himself. David Hartley drove home that morning the same way he'd driven home every morning for the last 2 years. Slowly, carefully, one hand on the wheel, the radio turned low. He didn't know it yet, but the colonel was already on the phone. He didn't know it yet, but somewhere on the other side of the country, a name he hadn't heard in 11 years was being typed into a secure database. He didn't know it yet, but the salute he'd just received in that supply depot was going to change his life. All he knew as he pulled into the driveway of the small 2-bedroom house he and Lily shared was that his hands were still shaking. Just a little. Just enough that he had to grip the wheel for a moment longer before he got out. He climbed the front steps, opened the door. Lily came running, pigtails bouncing, missing one front tooth, holding a piece of construction paper in her hand. "Daddy? Daddy, look, I drew you." He knelt down, took the paper. It was a crayon drawing of a man in green clothes with a yellow sun overhead, and the word hero spelled out in shaky red letters across the top. David stared at it for a long time. Then he hugged his daughter. Tight. Tighter than he meant to. He could feel her small arms around his neck, her cheek pressed against his shoulder, the faint smell of strawberry shampoo in her hair. "You okay, Daddy?" "Yeah, baby. I'm okay." "Did you have a good morning?" He thought about the depot, about the laughter, about the salute, about the colonel's pen scratching down his phone number. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I had a real good morning." He didn't know yet that his phone was about to ring. He didn't know yet that the voice on the other end of it would belong to a Brigadier General named Catherine Price. He didn't know yet that the next 48 hours of his life were going to be the most important 48 hours he'd lived since Kandahar. All he knew as he stood up with his daughter's drawing in his hand was that for the first time in 2 years, for the first time since he'd buried his wife and walked out of that hospital with an 8-year-old girl who didn't understand why mommy wasn't coming home, he felt like a man again, just a man, standing in his own front hall, holding a crayon drawing. And somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he'd locked up tight a long time ago, something was starting to crack open. The drawing was still in David's hand when his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen. Unknown number, Colorado area code. He almost let it go to voicemail. He'd been getting more spam calls lately than real ones, but something in his gut told him to pick up. "Hartley, Sergeant First Class Hartley. This is Brigadier General Catherine Price." David's whole body went still. Lily was tugging at the leg of his pants, asking if she could have apple juice. He held up one finger to her. "Just a moment, baby." And she nodded solemnly and padded back toward the kitchen. "General Price," David said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Yes, ma'am. I'm calling because Colonel Marsh contacted me about an hour ago regarding an incident at the Fort Carson Supply Depot this morning." David closed his eyes. He'd been hoping, really hoping, that the whole thing would just blow over. That the colonel would chew out the lieutenant would learn his lesson, and David could go back to being a guy who dropped off paperwork and forgot about it. "Ma'am, with respect, I don't want any of those young officers to get into serious trouble over—" "Sergeant, that's not why I'm calling." David stopped, waited. "I'm calling," General Price said, "because 11 years ago, you saved my brother's life." For a long moment, David didn't say anything. He couldn't. There was a roaring in his ears, like wind through a long tunnel. Captain Daniel Price, December 14, 2014. Convoy ambush, Helmand Province. He was the second vehicle. You were the team that came in for the extraction. David sat down. He hadn't realized he was still standing in the front hall. He sat down on the bottom step of the staircase, and Lily's drawing slipped out of his hand and onto the floor. "I remember," he said quietly. "He's a colonel now, Sergeant. He has 3 children. The oldest is named David. David Hartley, 46-year-old single father, retired. Sergeant, first-class holder of medals. He never displayed, put his free hand over his eyes, and didn't speak for almost 10 seconds. Ma'am, I don't know what to say to that." "You don't have to say anything. I've been wanting to thank you in person for 11 years. I've had 3 different staffs try to track you down. You don't make yourself easy to find, Sergeant." "No, ma'am, I guess I don't." There was a pause. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. He could hear something else, too. Papers shuffling, a door closing somewhere behind her. "Sergeant Hartley, I'd like to meet with you. Tomorrow morning, if possible. There's something I'd like to discuss with you in person." "Ma'am, I have my daughter." "Bring her." "Ma'am." "Bring her, Sergeant. I'd like to meet her too." David swallowed hard. He could hear Lily in the kitchen pouring her own apple juice into the plastic cup with the dinosaurs on it, the one she'd had since she was 4. "Yes, ma'am." "What time?" 0900, Building 12. Ask for me at the gate." "Yes, ma'am." "And Sergeant?" "Ma'am. For what it's worth, what those young officers said to you this morning, it will not happen again. Not in my command, not while I'm wearing this uniform." "Thank you, ma'am." The line clicked off. David sat on the bottom step for a long time. Then he picked up Lily's drawing from the floor, smoothed out the corner where it had bent, and stared at the crayon hero with the shaky red letters. Lily came back from the kitchen, apple juice, already half-gone, mustache of pulp on her upper lip. Daddy, who was on the phone. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long, long time. And then he said very carefully, "A friend, baby. An old friend I haven't seen in a while." "Is she nice?" "I think so. We're going to go visit her tomorrow. Would you like that?" "Will there be cookies?" David almost laughed. "I don't know, Lily. Maybe. We'll see." "Okay." She took another sip of her juice. "Daddy, why are your eyes wet?" David wiped his cheek with the back of his hand. He hadn't realized. Allergies, baby. The pollen's bad this time of year. "It's October, Daddy." "Yeah," he said softly. "I know it is." That night, after he'd put Lily to bed and read her 3 chapters of Charlotte's Web, they were halfway through and Lily was determined to finish it before Halloween. David went out to the garage and stood for a long time in front of the cedar chest his wife Sarah had bought at a yard sale 15 years ago. He hadn't opened it in 2 years, not all the way, and he knelt down, worked the latch, lifted the lid. The smell hit him first, cedar, of course, but under it something else, the faint, indelible smell of a uniform that had been packed up, still smelling of dust and diesel and the inside of a Blackhawk. 11 years sealed up tight, and the smell hadn't quite faded. He started taking things out one at a time. The folded flag from his father's funeral, he set that aside. A bundle of letters tied with a rubber band. Letters Sarah had written him during his second deployment. He didn't open them. He never opened them. He just touched the top one gently, like checking on a sleeping child, and set the bundle next to the flag. Then he reached deeper. A small, hard, square box made of dark blue leatherette. He held it in his palm for a moment without opening it. Then carefully, he flipped the lid back. The Distinguished Service Cross sat on its bed of velvet gold and bronze and unfaded after all these years. Beneath it, the little red, white, and blue ribbon. Beneath that, a folded square of paper, the citation. He hadn't read the citation in over a decade. He hadn't been able to. He read it now. For extraordinary heroism, in connection with military operations against an armed enemy, Sergeant First Class David R. Hartley distinguished himself by acts of gallantry at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. The words swam. He blinked them clear. With disregard for his personal safety, Sergeant Hartley led a 4-man team into the kill zone under direct enemy fire and successfully extracted 7 wounded American soldiers, 3 of whom would not have survived without his immediate intervention. David closed the citation, closed the box, held it in both hands for a moment, and then for the first time in 11 years, he didn't put it back in the chest. He carried it inside. He set it on the kitchen table, right next to Lily's drawing of the hero with the shaky red letters. Then he made himself a cup of black coffee that he didn't drink, and sat at the table and stared at the medal and the drawing side by side until the coffee went cold and the kitchen clock said it was almost 2 in the morning. The next morning, David woke Lily up at 7. She was groggy and disagreeable about it the way 8-year-olds always are, but when he told her they were going to visit Daddy's friend on a real army base, her eyes got wide. Like a real one with tanks. I don't know about tanks, baby, but it's a real army base. Can I wear my dress with the stars on it? Yeah, sweetheart, wear whatever you want. She wore the dress with the stars. Navy blue white stars, a little ruffle at the hem. She'd worn it to her mother's funeral. David hadn't been sure how he felt about that at the time. He still wasn't sure. But Lily loved that dress, and today of all days, she should wear what she loved. He put on his uniform again. The same one. He'd brushed the dust off the shoulders the night before, polished the boots until they looked almost new. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a long time. He didn't recognize the man looking back. Or no, he recognized him. He just hadn't seen him in a very long time. The drive to Fort Carson took 35 minutes. Lily asked questions the whole way. What did soldiers eat for lunch? Did they have a swimming pool? Could she meet a dog? The army had dogs, right? She'd seen a movie once. David answered each question patiently. He didn't tell her where they were going exactly, just that they were meeting an old friend. At the front gate, the MP stepped forward, looked at his ID and said, "Sergeant Hartley." "Yes, son." The MP straightened it up almost imperceptibly. "General Price is expecting you, sir. Building 12. You have an escort." A second MP, a sergeant, maybe 25, ramrod straight posture, climbed into a waiting vehicle and motioned for David to follow. "Daddy?" Lily whispered from the passenger seat as they drove through the gate. "Is your friend a general?" "Yeah, baby, she is." "Like a real general with the stars?" "Yeah." Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very seriously, "Daddy, I think I should not have worn this dress." David almost laughed. He reached over and squeezed her small hand. "That dress is exactly right, Lily Bear. I promise." Building 12 was 2 stories of brick and glass set back from the road behind a row of clipped hedges. A flag snapped from a pole out front. As David pulled into the visitor lot, he could see two soldiers standing at the entrance, not casual standing, but the alert formal posture of an honor guard. Lily noticed it too. "Daddy, why are those men standing like that?" "I don't know, baby." But he did know, or he was starting to. He parked, helped Lily out, held her hand as they walked toward the entrance. The two soldiers came to attention as he approached. One of them, a corporal by his stripes, saluted. David, on instinct, returned the salute. His old hand remembered exactly how. "Sir, ma'am, right this way. The general is expecting you." Lily looked up at her father with her eyes the size of saucers. David squeezed her hand a little tighter and walked through the door. Inside the lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from thick carpet and high ceilings and the deep, unhurried respect of an institution that knows what it's about. A receptionist, a sergeant in dress uniform, stood up the moment they entered. "Sergeant First Class Hartley." "That's me." "Right this way, sir. Miss Hartley, this way, please." Lily, hearing herself called Miss Hartley by a uniformed army sergeant, gripped her father's hand so tightly he thought she might bruise it. They walked down a long corridor lined with framed photographs. Generals in dress blues, old company photos in black and white. A glass case full of medals David didn't bother trying to identify. At the end of the corridor was a heavy wooden door. The sergeant knocked once, then opened it. "General, ma'am, Sergeant First Class Hartley and his daughter." "Send them in, please." David stepped into the office. Brigadier General Catherine Price was standing behind her desk. She was perhaps 55, slim silver in her dark hair, a single star on each shoulder of her dress uniform. She didn't have the hardness David sometimes associated with senior officers. Her face was, and this surprised him, kind. She walked around the desk. She walked straight up to David Hartley. And for the second time in 2 days, a senior officer of the United States Army came to attention and saluted him. David returned it. Crisp, clean. The general lowered her hand. Her eyes were shining. "Sergeant First Class Hartley, it is the honor of my career to finally shake your hand." She extended it. He took it. Her grip was firm. "Ma'am," David said quietly, "you don't have to." "Yes, Sergeant, I do." She held his hand for a moment longer, and David realized slowly with a kind of disbelief that the general was trying not to cry. Then she turned, and she looked down at Lily. Lily had pressed herself close against her father's leg. She was staring up at the general with the wide-eyed silence of a child who has suddenly understood she is in a very, very serious place. General Price knelt down, all the way down on one knee, so she was eye level with the little girl. "You must be Lily." Lily nodded. She didn't speak. "Lily, my name is Catherine. I'm a friend of your daddy's. I've been wanting to meet you for a long time." Lily, in the smallest voice in the world, said, "Hi." "That is a very beautiful dress, Lily. Did you pick it out yourself?" Lily nodded again. "It's perfect. It's exactly the right dress for today." General Price smiled at her. A real smile, the kind that softened her whole face. And then she said, "Lily, may I ask you a question?" Another nod. "Has your daddy ever told you what he did when he was a soldier?" Lily looked up at David, then back at the general. Then she shook her head. "He doesn't say." "Would you like me to tell you?" Lily looked at her father. There was a question in her face. "Is it okay?" David swallowed. His throat was tight. He nodded, just barely. "Yes, please," Lily whispered. General Price stayed on one knee. She took Lily's small hand in both of hers. "Lily," she said, "your daddy is a hero, a real true hero. 11 years ago, your daddy and his team flew a helicopter into a very bad place where some of our soldiers were hurt. The bad guys were shooting at them. It was very dangerous. But your daddy didn't stop. He went in and he picked up the soldiers who were hurt and he carried them out. One of those soldiers was my brother. His name is Daniel. Because of your daddy, my brother got to come home. He got to see his children grow up. He got to walk his daughter to her first day of school last month. Lily's lower lip was trembling. Your daddy did that, Lily. Your daddy saved my brother's life, and 6 other people's lives, on the same day, by himself. Lily turned her face up to her father. Daddy, is that true? David couldn't speak. He nodded. Lily looked back at the general, and in the small, clear voice of a child who has just understood something enormous, she said, I knew it. I knew you were a hero, Daddy. I drew you. She let go of the general's hand. She reached into the little pink purse she'd insisted on bringing, and she pulled out the crayon drawing, the one with the green clothes and the yellow sun and the shaky red letters that said, Hero. She held it up to General Price. I made this yesterday, before I knew. The general took the drawing very, very gently, like it was a piece of priceless artwork. She studied it for a long moment, and then she did something David did not expect. She stood up, walked behind her desk, and placed the drawing in the center of it, right in front of her chair, right where she would see it every single day she came to work. Lily, she said, with your permission, I'd like to keep this on my desk, so that everyone who comes into this office can see what a real hero looks like, through the eyes of his little girl. Lily looked at her father. David was crying. He didn't even try to hide it. He just nodded. Okay, Lily said. You can have it. The general smiled. Then she turned to David. Sergeant Hartley, I asked you here for 2 reasons. The first was to thank you, personally, for my brother, for all of them. Ma'am, David said, and his voice cracked. I was just doing my job. No, Sergeant, you were doing far more than your job, and that brings me to the second reason. She walked back around her desk, sat down, gestured for him to take the chair across from her. He did. He kept Lily on his lap. She wrapped her small arms around his neck and watched the general with the awestruck attention of a child meeting a princess. General Price folded her hands. Sergeant, I'm going to be very direct with you. You filed paperwork yesterday for a 20-hour-a-week unpaid volunteer logistics position. Yes, ma'am. I want to offer you something different. I want to offer you a paid civilian instructor position at this base. It would be 25 hours a week. It would pay $78,000 a year with full medical benefits for you and your daughter. The hours would be flexible enough that you would be home before Lily gets out of school every day. The work would consist of teaching tactics and mission planning to young officers, including, I might add, the officers who insulted you yesterday. David stared at her. Ma'am, I haven't taught anything since... Sergeant, before I make this offer, I want to be honest with you. I'm not doing this because of what happened yesterday. I'm not doing this out of pity. And I am certainly not doing this because of my brother, though God knows that would be reason enough. She leaned forward slightly. I'm doing this because we have a problem in this army, Sergeant. We have a generation of young officers who have read about heroism in books, who have watched it in films, who have practiced it in simulations, but who have never sat in a room with a man like you and listened to the truth of it. Yesterday, 4 of my lieutenants made a fool of themselves in front of one of the most decorated non-commissioned officers of the last 20 years. That is not their failure, Sergeant. That is my failure, and the failure of the institution that trained them. They have not been taught to recognize what they are looking at. She paused. I would like to fix that. I would like you to help me fix that. David looked down at Lily. She had her head against his chest. She was looking up at him with absolute, unshakable trust, the trust of a little girl who had just learned in the most concrete way possible that her father really was the man she had drawn in crayon. He thought about Sarah. He thought about all the years he'd been hiding the medals in the cedar chest in the garage. He thought about the bills on the kitchen counter, the gas bill, the property tax notice, the orthodontist's quote for Lily's overbite that he'd been quietly putting off. He thought about his daughter asking him last month in the small, wondering voice of a child, "Daddy, are soldiers heroes?" And he thought maybe it's time to stop hiding. He looked up, met General Price's eyes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady now, "when do you need me to start?" The general smiled. "How does next Monday sound, Sergeant?" "Next Monday sounds just fine, ma'am." She stood up. He stood up, lifting Lily with him. She came around the desk again, and she put her hand on his shoulder. It was a small gesture, but David felt it all the way down to his bones. "Welcome back, Sergeant Hartley." He looked down at his daughter. Lily was beaming at him. "Ma'am," he said, I think I forgot how much I missed it." "I know you did, Sergeant. I know you did." She walked them to the door. Just before they stepped out into the corridor, she stopped and she said one more thing quietly, almost to herself. "Sergeant, there is one more thing you should know. Lieutenant Carver, the young man who insulted you yesterday, has requested permission to be in your first instructional cohort." David turned. "He what, ma'am?" "He came to my office at 0600 this morning. He stood at attention for 40 minutes and asked repeatedly to be assigned to your first class." David thought about that for a moment. About a 26-year-old kid who had probably not slept all night. "Permission granted, ma'am. Tell him I'll see him Monday." The general almost smiled. "I'll tell him myself, Sergeant." David walked his daughter out of Building 12 and into a morning that was clearer and brighter than any morning he could remember in a very long time. Lily was holding his hand. She was skipping a little. She kept looking up at him like he was the most amazing person in the world. At the door of the truck, she turned to him. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby. Can we tell Grandma about today?" David thought about his mother, 81 years old, in the assisted living facility on the other side of town. He thought about how every time he visited, she asked him the same question, "David, when are you going to stop hiding from yourself?" "Yeah, Lily, we're going to tell Grandma. We're going to tell her tonight." He buckled Lily into her seat, walked around to the driver's side, got in, sat with his hands on the wheel. He didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there in the parking lot of Building 12 on a Wednesday morning in October and let the sunlight come through the windshield onto his face. Let it warm him. Let it find the cold places he'd been carrying for a long, long time. Lily in the passenger seat was humming softly to herself. David Hartley closed his eyes, and for the first time in 11 years, he felt like he was finally on the way home. Monday morning came faster than David expected. He was awake at 4:30, the way he'd always been awake at 4:30 when he'd had something important to do. The house was quiet. Lily was still sleeping curled around her stuffed rabbit, the one her mother had given her on her 4th birthday. David stood in her doorway for a long time, just watching her breathe. Then he went downstairs and made coffee. He'd spent the weekend preparing. Not for the lesson itself, he'd been a soldier for 22 years, and tactics weren't something you forgot any more than you forgot your own name, but for everything else. He'd bought a new shirt, pressed his good slacks, polished a different pair of boots, the dress ones he kept in the back of the closet. He'd called his mother on Saturday and told her about the job. She'd cried. Not the sad kind of crying, the other kind. The kind that took 12 years to come out. "David," she'd said, "your father would be so proud." "I hope so, Mom." "He would. You hear me? He would." Now sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee getting cold in front of him, David pulled out the spiral notebook he'd bought at the grocery store. He'd written down a few things over the weekend. Just bullet points, names, dates, a handful of operations he was actually allowed to talk about. He stared at the first page for a long time. Then he closed the notebook and set it aside. Ben. He didn't need notes. What he was going to teach those young officers wasn't in any book. It wasn't even in his memory, not exactly. It was in his hands. In the way his thumb still found the safety on a rifle he hadn't held in over a decade. in the way his ears still picked up a helicopter from a half-mile off before any civilian could hear it, in the way he still sometimes woke up at 3 in the morning and reached for a sidearm that wasn't on the nightstand anymore. You couldn't teach that from a notebook. At 7:15, Lily came downstairs in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, are you nervous?" "A little baby." "Don't be nervous. You're a hero." David almost laughed. He pulled her into his lap. She smelled like sleep and strawberry shampoo. "Lily Bear, you can't just say that to people. It's a private thing." "Why?" David opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Because heroes don't usually like being called heroes." "Why not?" Because the people who really were heroes, most of them didn't come home, baby." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Like Mommy didn't come home." David held her a little tighter. "Different kind, sweetheart. But yeah, kinda like that." She thought about it for a long time in the way only an 8-year-old can think about a thing completely, with her whole self. "Okay, Daddy, I won't tell people, but I'll know." "Yeah, baby, you'll know. That's enough." Mrs. Patterson, the babysitter from down the street, arrived at 7:40. David kissed Lily on the top of her head, told her he'd be home before 3, and walked out the front door. He didn't drive straight to the base. He drove to the cemetery first. Sarah was buried in the small Methodist cemetery on the east side of town. David hadn't been there in 4 months. He'd kept telling himself he should go more often. He kept not going. There was a kind of weight to it that he hadn't been ready to carry. He parked near the back, walked up the slope, found her stone, the small gray granite one with the cross etched in the corner, the one he'd picked out himself when he couldn't see straight from grief. He stood there for a long minute without saying anything. Then he said very quietly, "Sarah, I got a job. A real one. Teaching." The wind moved through the trees. "It's at Fort Carson. They're paying me. Real money. Lily's gonna get her teeth fixed, baby. We're gonna be okay." He stopped, cleared his throat. I'm wearing the uniform again. Not all the time, just when I teach. I know you used to say I should be proud of it. I know you said I was hiding. I think you were right. I was hiding." He pressed his hand flat against the top of the stone. It was cold. "I'll come visit more. I promise." He stood there a moment longer. Then he walked back to his truck, started the engine, and drove to Fort Carson. The MP at the gate recognized him, saluted him, waved him through. David parked in the lot behind Building 7, the training annex where General Price's office had assigned him to a small classroom on the 2nd floor. He sat in the truck for a moment with his hands on the wheel. He took a breath, a long one, the kind he used to take before kicking down a door. Then he got out and walked inside. Specialist Reyes. The kid from the supply depot was waiting for him in the lobby. He'd been reassigned apparently. A post-it note on his sleeve in someone's handwriting that wasn't his said Hartley Liaison. "Sergeant," Reyes said, snapping a salute. "Good morning, sir." "Reyes, you don't have to call me sir. I'm not officer." "Sir, with respect, you're whatever the general says you are, and the general said you are." David almost smiled. "Lead the way, specialist." The classroom was on the 2nd floor end of the hall. As David walked toward it, he could hear voices behind the door. Quiet restrained the murmur of a dozen young men and women trying not to let their nerves show. Reyes opened the door for him. David walked in. 12 lieutenants, standing, at attention. The moment he crossed the threshold, all 12 of them snapped to their feet so fast it sounded like a single sharp crack. David stopped in the doorway. He hadn't expected that. In the front row, second from the left, was Lieutenant Carver. Carver's face was pale. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed straight ahead. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in 5 days, which David thought was probably accurate. David walked to the front of the room, set his small leather satchel on the desk, turned to face them. "At ease," he said. They went to parade rest, not full ease, parade rest, backs straight, hands clasped behind their lower spines. "Take your seats," David said. They sat. 12 chairs, 12 sets of eyes, all of them on him. David leaned against the front of the desk. He folded his arms. He looked at them, really looked at them for a long moment, without speaking. Then he said, "Show of hands, how many of you have deployed?" 3 hands went up, cautiously. "How many of you have been in a firefight?" 1 hand went up. A young woman in the back row, light brown hair pulled tight in a regulation bun. Her name tag said Lieutenant Vasquez. David nodded at her. "Where, Lieutenant?" "Northeast Syria, sir, 2023. We were advisors." "How long?" 22 minutes, sir." David nodded slowly. "Lieutenant Vasquez, what was the longest 22 minutes of your life?" She didn't hesitate. "That one, sir." "Yeah," David said quietly. "Yeah, I bet it was." He let that sit for a moment. He could feel the room shift. The young officers who hadn't deployed were sitting up straighter. They were paying attention in a different way now. "My name is David Hartley. I retired from the Army in 2014 at the rank of Sergeant First Class. For the last 7 years of my service, I was the senior NCO on a small unit you don't have clearance to know the operational details of. Some of you may have heard rumors. Forget those rumors. They're either wrong or they're classified. Either way, they're not the lesson today." He paused. "The General has asked me to teach you tactics and mission planning. I'm going to do that. But before I do, I want to be very honest with you about something." He looked deliberately at Lieutenant Carver. Carver's eyes met his. The young man didn't flinch. "Last Tuesday," David said, "a young officer in this room called my uniform a costume. He thought it was funny. His friends laughed. I want you to understand something, all of you. I am not telling this story to embarrass anyone. I am telling it because it is the lesson. Lieutenant Carver, please stand up." Carver was on his feet in an instant. David walked toward him, stopped about 3 feet away. "Lieutenant, why did you laugh at my uniform?" Carver's voice came out steady but tight. "Sir, because I didn't recognize the pattern, sir, and because I assumed without evidence that someone wearing an outdated pattern wasn't a real soldier, sir." "Why did you assume that?" "A beat." "Because, sir, because I thought I knew everything I needed to know about who a real soldier looks like." David nodded. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Sit down." Carver sat. David walked back to the front of the room. He turned to face them. "Lieutenant Carver just gave you the entire reason this Army has an NCO Corps, ladies and gentlemen. Because officers, even good ones, sometimes think they know everything they need to know. And the job of a senior non-com, the job of a sergeant first class, is to walk into the room, plant his feet, and say, 'No, sir, you don't.'" He paused. "Don't. That is what I am here to teach you, not tactics. Tactics is the easy part. I am here to teach you how to not know everything. I am here to teach you how to listen to the man with the patch you don't recognize. Because someday, God forbid, but someday, you are going to be in a situation where the only thing standing between your soldiers and a body bag is the fact that you listened to someone you almost dismissed." The room was completely silent. David walked to the whiteboard. He picked up a marker. He wrote one word on the board in big block letters. "Listen." Then he turned back to face them. "That's the lesson today. The rest is just exercises." He spent the next hour walking them through a planning scenario, convoy security, route selection, threat assessment. He didn't tell them what to do. He gave them the situation and he let them argue about it. He listened to them argue. He let them be wrong, and then gently, without ever raising his voice, he asked the kind of questions that made them realize one by one that they'd been wrong. He could feel as the hour went on, the room loosening. Not relaxing, they were still tight as bowstrings, every last one of them, but loosening into something more like real engagement. They were thinking, really thinking. not performing. At the end of the hour, he set down the marker. That's enough for today. Read chapters 4 and 7 of your tactics manual before Wednesday. Be ready to tear them apart. They got some things wrong, and I want to hear which things. The lieutenants stood, came to attention. Dismissed. They filed out. Quiet, thoughtful, none of them lingering, except one. Lieutenant Carver waited until the others were gone. Then he walked up to the front of the room. He stood about a yard from David, hands at his sides. Sir, permission to speak. Go ahead, son. Sir, I wrote the paper General Price ordered me to write, about 519 Echo, about the men and women who served there. I read about Sergeant Lopez, sir. David's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Carver couldn't have known what Sergeant Hector Lopez had meant to him, but the kid was smart enough to see that the name landed. What about him, Lieutenant? What about him? He was your second in command, sir. He was killed during the extraction in Helmand Province in December of 2014. That's right. Sir, the citation says you carried him, sir, from the kill zone, 2 kilometers, under fire, for 2 hours, after he was already gone. David didn't say anything for a moment. Sir, I don't have a question. I just wanted you to know that I read it, and I wanted to say I'm sorry, sir, for more than just the joke. David looked at him for a long moment. Carver. Sir. Hector Lopez was the best man I ever served with. He had a wife and 2 boys. The youngest one was 3 months old when he was killed. His wife sent me a Christmas card every year for 9 years. Last year was the first year she didn't. I called her in February to make sure she was okay. She'd remarried. Good man. A teacher. He paused. I didn't carry Hector for 2 hours because regulations said I had to. I carried him because he would have carried me. I carried him because I wasn't going to leave him in that valley. I carried him because his boys needed to bury their father. His voice didn't shake, but it was very quiet. Lieutenant, the reason I'm telling you this is not because I want your sympathy. I don't. The reason I'm telling you this is because someday you are going to be in command of soldiers. And those soldiers are going to be people. They are going to be Hectors. They are going to have wives and sons and Christmas cards. And if you forget that, if you ever forget that, then you don't deserve the bars on your shoulder. Are we clear? Sir, yes, sir. Don't ever look at a uniform and see a costume again. No, sir, I won't. David nodded once. Dismissed, Lieutenant. Carver saluted. David returned it. Then the young man turned and walked out of the classroom, and David Hartley stood alone in front of an empty whiteboard with the word "Listen" still written on it, and he allowed himself for the first time in 11 years to think about Hector Lopez without flinching. Nettie. He thought about Hector's laugh, Hector's terrible singing voice, the picture Hector kept in his helmet of his oldest boy in a Spider-Man costume, the way Hector used to call him Jefe even though they were the same rank. He thought about all of it. He stood there in the empty classroom, and he let himself remember. And he didn't break. For the first time, he didn't break. He picked up his satchel. He erased the whiteboard. He walked out of the classroom. In the corridor, Specialist Reyes was waiting for him. How'd it go, sir? It went, Reyes. It went. General Price asked if you would stop by her office before you head home. Now. Whenever you're ready, sir. David walked across the quad to Building 12, the same path he'd walked with Lily a week ago. The 2 MPs at the entrance came to attention as he approached. He nodded to them. They nodded back. The receptionist sergeant smiled when he came in. Sergeant Hartley, the general is expecting you. He walked down the corridor, knocked on the heavy wooden door. Come in. He stepped inside. General Price was at her desk. Lily's drawing was still in the center of it, exactly where she'd placed it the week before. The general was on the phone. She held up one finger to David, motioning him toward the chair across from her. Yes, sir, I understand. Yes, sir, he's just walked in. I'll ask him. She listened for a long moment. Her eyes were on David's the whole time. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. I'll let you know within the hour. She hung up the phone. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked at him. Sergeant, that was the Pentagon. David's stomach tightened. Ma'am? Specifically, that was Lieutenant General Holloway, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. David didn't say anything. Sergeant, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to say, because what I am about to say is going to require you to make a decision that I cannot make for you. Yes, ma'am. She folded her hands. 3 days ago, I sent a memo up the chain. The memo was about you. It was about what happened in the supply depot. It was about my proposal to bring you on as a civilian instructor. It was a routine memo. It should have stopped at my deputy commander's desk. She paused. It didn't stop there. It was forwarded. It kept being forwarded. Apparently, Sergeant, your name has come up before at much higher levels, and a number of people in Washington have been waiting for an opportunity like this one. David swallowed. Ma'am, what kind of opportunity? The general looked at him for a long, careful moment. Sergeant, the Department of Defense is currently in the process of designing a new training pipeline, a pipeline specifically for senior non-commissioned officers who will be deploying with junior officers in advisory roles. The current training is, to put it bluntly, not very good. We have lost too many young lieutenants and too many good sergeants because the two of them never learned how to talk to each other. Ma'am. They want to model a pilot program of this pipeline. They want to base it on lessons learned. They want it run by someone who actually lived through what they're trying to teach. She paused. They want to talk to you about running it, Sergeant. David didn't move. Ma'am, I'm a civilian. I retired. Yes, Sergeant, you did. Ma'am, with respect, I have a daughter. I can't go back to active. I can't do that to her. Sergeant, nobody is asking you to go back to active duty. Then what are they asking, ma'am? The general's voice was quiet. They're asking you to consult. 6 weeks at the Pentagon. Then, if it works out, 6 months a year based out of Fort Carson, designing the curriculum and traveling occasionally to the schools that will teach it. Civilian contract. $240,000 a year. Lily comes with you. Full housing, full schools, full benefits. David sat very still. Ma'am. Take your time, Sergeant. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet. Go home. Talk to your daughter. Visit your wife. Pray if you pray. Then come back and tell me what you've decided. The general gave me until tomorrow morning. David stood up. His legs felt strange. The general stood up too. She walked around the desk and put her hand on his shoulder. Sergeant, I want you to know something. Whatever you decide, I think you should know that the reason they want you specifically is because of what you said to Lieutenant Carver this afternoon. David looked at her sharply. Ma'am. Specialist Reyes was outside the door. He heard. He told the right person. The right person told the right person. By the time I had Lieutenant General Holloway on the phone an hour ago, every word you said to that young man had made it to the Pentagon. David didn't know what to say. Sergeant, you spent 22 years in this army hiding what you knew. Now there is an entire generation of young officers who need you to stop hiding. She paused. Go home, Sergeant. Talk to your little girl. David nodded slowly. He walked out of her office, walked down the long corridor, walked past the framed photographs of generals in dress blues, walked out into the parking lot. He sat in his truck for a long, long time. Then he started the engine and he drove home. Lily was waiting on the front porch when he pulled in. She had a book in her lap. The book was Charlotte's Web. She'd been reading ahead without him. She jumped up when she saw the truck. Daddy! Daddy, how was it? Did you teach the soldiers? David got out of the truck, walked up the steps, sat down next to her. He took her small hand in his. "Lily Bear, I need to talk to you about something." Lily set her book down very carefully on the porch step. She'd learned in the 2 years since her mother had died that when Daddy sat next to her like this and held her hand and said, "I need to talk to you about something," it usually meant something big was coming. Sometimes good big, sometimes hard big, but always big. "Okay, Daddy, I'm listening." David almost smiled at that. "I'm listening." She got that from him. He'd been telling her since she was 4 years old. Listen first, baby. Always listen first. "Lily Bear, today at the base the general told me something. She told me that some men in Washington, important men in the army, they want me to come help them. They want me to help them teach a lot of soldiers all over the country how to do their jobs better." Lily was quiet, watching his face. "And the thing is, baby, the thing is, if I say yes, we'd have to move to Washington, D.C. for about 6 weeks. And then we'd come back here, mostly. But sometimes I'd have to travel a little bit, to different places. Together." "What's that, baby?" "Would we move together, you and me?" "Yeah, Lily, together, always together. I'd never go anywhere without you." She thought about it. She had a way of thinking about big things that David sometimes envied, without panic, without hurry, with the kind of clear-eyed seriousness that only children and the very old seem to manage. "Daddy, would I have to go to a new school?" "Just for 6 weeks, baby. Then you'd come back to your old school, your same friends, Mrs. Peterson's class, same as now." "What about Mommy?" David's chest tightened. "What do you mean, Lily Bear? If we go to Washington, Mommy's here, in the cemetery. We can't take her with us." David didn't answer right away. He hadn't been ready for that question. He should have been. Lily was thoughtful. She always thought of those things, but somehow he hadn't been. "Lily, baby, Mommy's not in the cemetery. Mommy's everywhere we are. The cemetery is just where we go to remember her. We can remember her in Washington, too." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, baby." She thought about that for another long moment. Then she nodded, a small, decided nod, like a judge ruling on a case. "Okay, we can go to Washington. But Daddy..." "Yeah. You have to keep teaching the soldiers, even if it's hard, because they need you." David looked at his 8-year-old daughter, and for a second, he couldn't speak. "How do you know they need me, Lily?" "Because the general said so, and the general is very important, so if she said it, it's true." David let out a slow breath. He put his arm around her shoulder and pulled her in close, and she leaned her head against his side. "Lily Bear, I love you so much." "I love you too, Daddy." They sat there on the porch for a long time, watching the sun start to drop behind the houses across the street. A neighbor was mowing his lawn. A dog was barking 3 doors down. Some kids were riding bikes. Just an ordinary Monday afternoon in October. David had decided before they even came inside. That night, after he put Lily to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with his phone. He looked at the contact General Price had given him. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long time. Then he set the phone down. He wasn't going to call her. Not tonight. He owed her a face-to-face answer in the morning. Some things you didn't do over the phone. But there was someone he did want to call. He scrolled through his contacts to a name he hadn't dialed in 11 years. Maria Lopez. He took a long breath, pressed the call button. It rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice, softer than he remembered, a little tired. "Hello?" "Maria, it's David. David Hartley." There was a pause on the other end of the line. He could hear her catch her breath. "David. Oh my God, David, is it really you?" "Yeah, Maria, it's me." "How are you? Are you okay? Is everything okay?" "I'm okay. Everything's okay. Maria, I just wanted to call you. I should have called you a long time ago. I'm sorry I didn't." "David, you don't have to apologize. You don't have to apologize for anything, ever." He swallowed hard. "Maria, I have to ask you something. And I want you to be honest with me. Completely honest." "Anything, David." Did he ever, when he talked about me before, did he? He couldn't quite get the question out. But Maria somehow knew exactly what he was asking, the way only a soldier's wife can know. "David, listen to me. He loved you. He loved you like a brother. He used to tell me, he used to say, 'Maria, if anything ever happens to me, out there, Jefe will get me home.' He believed in you. And you got him home. You did. He's home, David. He's right here. The boys visit him every Sunday. He's home because of you." "Why?" David closed his eyes. He felt something in his chest let go, something he hadn't realized he'd been holding for 11 years. "Maria, I'm going back to work. With the army. As a civilian. They want me to teach. To teach young officers and young sergeants how to take care of each other. So that maybe fewer mothers and fathers and wives have to..." His voice broke. Maria didn't say anything for a moment. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "David, Hector would be so proud." "You think so? I know so. He used to say you were the best teacher in the army. He said the brass were wasting you on missions when they should have put you in front of a classroom. He said it for years, David." David almost laughed. He hadn't known that. Hector had never told him. "Maria, there's one more thing." "Yeah. I have a daughter. Her name's Lily. She's 8. "I know. Oh, David, I know I read about Sarah. I'm so sorry. I should have called you. I should have come." "It's okay. It's okay, Maria. We're okay. The reason I'm telling you about Lily is when she's old enough, I want to bring her to meet your boys. I want her to meet Hector's boys." "Yes. Yes, David. Anytime. They would love that. Anytime." "Thank you, Maria. Thank you for everything." "David, thank you for calling after all this time." He hung up the phone and he sat at the kitchen table and he pressed his palms flat against the wood, and for a long time he didn't move. In the morning, he drove Lily to school. He kissed her on the top of the head as she got out of the truck. She turned around at the door of the school and waved at him, a serious little wave, the wave of a girl on a mission, and then she disappeared inside. David drove to Fort Carson. He walked into Building 12, past the MPs who saluted him, past the receptionist sergeant who smiled at him, down the long corridor. He knocked on General Price's door. "Come in." He stepped inside. The general looked up from her desk. Lily's drawing was still there. So was a fresh cup of coffee untouched. "Sergeant, have you decided?" "Yes, ma'am." And David stood up straight. He wasn't in uniform that morning, just a plain button-down and his work pants, but somehow his body still remembered how to come to attention. "Ma'am, I'd like to accept the position." General Price didn't smile. She just nodded a single controlled nod, the kind of nod that contained a great deal more emotion than it showed. "Thank you, Sergeant. I'll inform the Pentagon." "Yes, ma'am." "Sit down, David." It was the first time she'd called him by his first name. He sat down. The general leaned back in her chair. "David, there are some things I should tell you about what you're walking into. Some of them are good. Some of them are not." "Yes, ma'am. The good. The pilot program will be funded for 3 years initially. If it works, and I have every reason to believe it will work, it will become permanent. You will be the founding director. Your name will be on the curriculum. The men and women who go through this program will know they went through Hartley." David shifted in his chair. He hadn't thought about that. "Ma'am, I'm not really comfortable with..." "David, stop. The reason your name has to be on it is because the people who put their names on things are the people who are willing to be held accountable when things go wrong. And in this kind of work, things will go wrong. Your name being on it isn't a reward, it's a responsibility. Yes, ma'am. The bad. There will be people in Washington who do not want this program to succeed. There are senior officers who are deeply invested in the way things are now. They built their careers on the current pipeline, and they will not appreciate having a retired sergeant first class, however decorated, telling them that the way they have been doing things is wrong. Ma'am. Some of them will try to derail you. Some of them will try to discredit you. Some of them will dig into your personnel file looking for something they can use. Some of them will dig into your personal file, your wife's death, your daughter, your finances. Anything they can find. David's jaw tightened. Ma'am, with respect, anyone who tries to use Lily against me is going to find out what kind of mistake they made. David, I know that. And I want you to remember the right way to handle those people is not through them. It's through the work. The work has to speak. If the work speaks, no amount of leaked memos and old grudges will be able to stop it. Yes, ma'am. There's one more thing, and this is the most important thing. He waited. David, the reason your name came up at the Pentagon, the reason Lieutenant General Holloway personally asked for you is because 3 years ago his only son was killed in a training accident in Louisiana. Crushed under a Bradley. His name was Lieutenant Daniel Holloway. He was 24 years old. David didn't move. The cause of the accident was determined to be a breakdown in communication between Lieutenant Holloway and his senior NCO. Neither of them did anything wrong technically. They each made what they thought was the correct call. But the calls didn't add up, and a young man died. She paused. Lieutenant General Holloway has spent the last 3 years trying to make sure no other father has to bury his son for that reason. David swallowed hard. Ma'am. David, I'm not telling you this to put pressure on you. I'm telling you because when you walk into that man's office at the Pentagon, and you will in 3 weeks, you are going to be looking at a father who lost his only son. And you are going to need to know what's behind his eyes when he looks at you. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for telling me. The general nodded. Now go home, David. Pack a bag. The general's office will be in touch about logistics. You report to Washington in 3 weeks. He stood up. So did she. She extended her hand. He shook it. Ma'am, thank you for all of it. David, don't thank me. Just do the work. Yes, ma'am. He walked out of her office, walked down the corridor, walked out into the parking lot. He sat in his truck for a moment with his hands on the wheel. 3 weeks. 3 weeks until everything changed. He drove home. The next 2 weeks went by in a blur. He continued teaching the lieutenants at Fort Carson. Lieutenant Carver came to every single class. He sat in the front row. He took notes. He asked good questions. He did not, after that first day, mention his apology again, and David didn't either. They both, in the way men in uniform sometimes do, simply moved past it, without ever needing to name what they had moved past. Lieutenant Vasquez, the young woman who had spent 22 minutes in a firefight in Syria, became David's best student. Not because she was smarter than the others, though she was certainly bright, but because she had something the others didn't have yet. She had been afraid for her life. And because she had been afraid for her life, she knew that no plan ever survived contact with the enemy. And she knew that the only thing that did survive was the trust between the people in the room. She got it. She got it the way you only get it when you've sat in the dirt with bullets coming over your head and thought very calmly, I might not make it home. David started staying after class to talk to her. Not about tactics, just talking. One afternoon near the end of the second week, she lingered after the others had gone. Sergeant, can I ask you something personal? Sure, Lieutenant. How did you do it after? After you came home? How did you go on? David leaned against the desk. He thought about it for a long time. Vasquez, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't do it well. For a long time, I didn't do it at all. I came home and I drank too much and I yelled at my wife for things that weren't her fault and I scared my own daughter when she walked into the room behind me too quietly. I was a mess. What changed? David thought about that too. My wife died. That's what changed. She got sick, and she died, and there wasn't anybody else to take care of Lily. So I had to stop being a mess. I had to figure out how to be a person again, because she needed me to be. Vasquez didn't say anything for a moment. Sergeant, sometimes I have a hard time. Not all the time. Just sometimes. And I'm scared that if I tell anyone my career's over. David straightened up. Lieutenant, listen to me, listen. You go to medical, today. You tell them what's going on. You ask for help. The Army has gotten a lot better about this. It's not what it was when I came home. There's people whose entire job is to help you with what you're feeling. Use them. Sergeant, if it's in my file. Vasquez, if it's in your file, that's good. That means somebody knows. That means somebody's checking. The career risk is not getting help. The career risk is also the life risk. Do you hear me? She nodded slowly. Yes, Sergeant. Promise me. I promise, Sergeant. Good. Tomorrow morning I want you to come tell me you went. Yes, Sergeant. She walked out. He watched her go. He stood in the empty classroom for a long time. That night when he tucked Lily in, she was holding her stuffed rabbit and looking at him very seriously. Daddy, when are we leaving? Next Sunday, baby, 6 days. Are you scared? David almost said no. The way fathers always say no. The way he'd said it to her 10,000 times before about 10,000 things. But this time, he didn't. A little baby. Yeah. Why? Because it's a big thing I'm trying to do. And there's gonna be people who don't want me to do it. And I don't want to mess it up. Lily thought about this. Daddy, you won't mess it up. How do you know? Because you're my daddy, and my daddy doesn't mess things up. David looked at his daughter. He smiled. He smoothed her hair back from her forehead. Lily Bear, you know what? You might be right. I am right. Good night, baby. Good night, Daddy. He turned off her lamp, walked downstairs, sat at the kitchen table. The Distinguished Service Cross was still there, the little blue leatherette box. He'd been meaning to put it back in the cedar chest. He'd kept not putting it back. He picked it up, opened the lid, looked at the metal. Then he closed it, and he carried it upstairs, and he set it on the dresser in his bedroom out in the open where he could see it from the bed. He didn't need to hide it anymore. 6 days later, on a Sunday morning, David Hartley loaded 2 suitcases and a child's backpack into a rental SUV. Lily climbed into the back seat. Mrs. Patterson, who would be looking after the house while they were gone, stood on the front porch, waving a tissue. You take care of him, Lily, she called. I will, Mrs. Patterson. David started the engine. He looked over at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Ready, Lily Bear? Ready, Daddy. He pulled out of the driveway. He drove down the street he'd lived on for 16 years, past the elementary school, past the cemetery where the day before he'd taken Lily to say goodbye to Sarah for a little while, past the hardware store, past the diner where he'd had his first real job bussing tables when he was 15 years old. Out onto the highway, toward the airport, toward Washington, D.C., toward whatever came next. Lily in the back seat was humming to herself. The same song she always hummed when she was happy and a little nervous. It was an old song, You Are My Sunshine. Sarah had sung it to her every night when she was small. David listened to her humming, and he gripped the wheel a little tighter, and he drove east into the morning sun. 3 hours later, on a plain high above the Rocky Mountains, with Lily asleep against his shoulder and her stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. David Hartley closed his eyes. He'd flown thousands of times in his life on Blackhawks, on C-17, on civilian airliners going to bases he wasn't supposed to talk about. But this was different. This was the first flight he could remember in 25 years where he wasn't going somewhere to hurt someone or to bring someone home. This time, he was going somewhere to teach. He looked down at his daughter, and he thought about Hector Lopez, and he thought about Sarah, and he thought about a young lieutenant named Daniel Holloway, who he had never met, but whose father was waiting for him in a corner office in the Pentagon. He thought about the lieutenant who had called his uniform a costume. He thought about how strange it was, how strange and how true that an insult in a supply depot from a kid who didn't know any better had cracked something open in him that he had needed. Cracked open for 11 years. The plane crossed the spine of the continent. The sun came up over the plains. Lily slept against his shoulder. And David Hartley, for the first time he could remember, flew east toward the rest of his life with no fear in his chest at all. The plane landed at Reagan National just after 1 in the afternoon. Lily woke up as the wheels touched the ground, rubbing her eyes and looking out the window at the city, at the white dome of the Capitol in the distance, at the Washington Monument, standing tall against a clear October sky. "Daddy, is that real?" "Yeah, Lily, that's all real." "It looks like a postcard." "That's where postcards come from, baby." A driver was waiting for them at the curb, a specialist in dress uniform, holding a small paper sign that said Hartley. He saluted David before David could say anything, then introduced himself as Specialist Bennett and took both their bags. "Sir, ma'am, welcome to Washington. The General has arranged for an apartment in Crystal City, 2 bedrooms, walking distance to a park. Lieutenant General Holloway's office sent over a list of schools, but they'd like to hear what you think before they make any final decisions, ma'am." Lily looked up at the soldier with wide eyes. "Are you talking to me?" "Yes, ma'am. The General said your input was important." David almost laughed. Lily was for once completely speechless. The apartment was small but bright on the 8th floor of a brick building with a view of a courtyard with a fountain. There was a bowl of fruit on the kitchen counter. Apples, oranges, a couple of bananas with a handwritten note that just said, "Welcome, K. Price." The General had called Holloway's office personally. David picked up the note and held it for a moment. That first week was paperwork. Background checks, security clearances, signing his name on documents in places he hadn't signed his name in years. He took Lily to 2 different schools to walk through the classrooms. She picked the second one, a small public elementary about 10 blocks away, because the rabbit in the lobby is friendlier. Daddy and David trusted her judgment without arguing. On Friday morning of that first week, a black sedan picked him up at 6:30. He was wearing a navy blue suit. He hadn't worn a suit since Sarah's funeral. He'd had to buy a new shirt and a new tie at the mall in Crystal City the night before, while Lily sat patiently on a bench in the men's department, playing on a tablet and offering opinions on his choices. "That one looks too funeral, Daddy." "This one. Better, but the stripe is too thin." "Lily, you're 8 years old." "I'm an expert at this. Mommy taught me." He'd nearly cried in the men's section of JCPenney. Now sitting in the back of the sedan as it crossed the Memorial Bridge, David Hartley looked out at the river and felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. He felt ready. The Pentagon was bigger than any building had a right to be. He'd been there before, twice, both times briefly, both times in uniform, both times under circumstances he wasn't going to think about today. Specialist Bennett walked him through the entrance, through the security checkpoint, down a corridor that seemed to go on forever, and finally to a heavy wooden door with a brass plate that said, "Lieutenant General Robert Holloway, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations." A young aide opened the door before they could knock. "Sergeant First Class Hartley, the General's expecting you. Please go right in." David walked in. Lieutenant General Robert Holloway was sitting behind a large mahogany desk. He was perhaps 60 years old, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes the color of cold steel. He stood up as David came in. He didn't smile. He didn't say a word. He just walked around the desk, came to attention, and saluted. David, his throat tight, returned it. The general held the salute for a long, long moment. Then he lowered his hand. He extended it. David shook it. Sergeant Hartley, thank you for coming. Sir, thank you for having me. Please, sit down. David sat. The general sat back down behind his desk. He folded his hands in front of him. For a moment, the general didn't speak. Then he said very quietly, "My son's name was Daniel." "Yes, sir. General Price told me." He was 24 years old. He had been in the Army for 11 months. He was on a routine training exercise at Fort Polk. The Bradley he was supervising lost traction on a wet slope. The senior NCO in the vehicle made a call to reposition. My son made a call to halt. The two calls were not coordinated. Daniel was outside the vehicle directing traffic when it slid. He didn't see it coming. David didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. "Sergeant, I have read your service record, the classified portions, the whole of it." "Yes, sir." "I have read the after-action reports for every operation you led between 2008 and 2014. "Yes, sir." "I have read what your soldiers wrote about you in their personal evaluations of senior NCOs over the years. Without exception, Sergeant, without exception, every single one of them said the same thing. They said, 'He listened.'" The general paused. "Sergeant, I am 61 years old. I have spent 40 years in this army. I have buried, God help me, 23 soldiers who served under my command. Most of them in combat, some of them in accidents. One of them was my son." He looked at David. "I am not asking you to do something easy, Sergeant. I am not asking you to design a curriculum. I am asking you to change the culture of an institution that does not want to change. I am asking you to spend the next several years of your life arguing with people who outrank you on paper, but do not understand what you understand. I am asking you to do this work because there are men and women, boys and girls, Sergeant, who are alive today and will be alive tomorrow, but who will not be alive in 2 years if we do not change this." He paused. "Will you do it?" David didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir, I will." The general nodded slowly. There was something in his eyes, a wetness that he made no attempt to hide. "Thank you, Sergeant." "Sir, may I say something?" "Please." "Sir, I want you to know that I'll think about your son every day, every class I teach, every officer I train. Lieutenant Daniel Holloway he's going to be in that classroom with me, sir, whether his name is on the wall or not." The general did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was very quiet. "Sergeant, I would be honored if his name was on the wall." "Yes, sir, it will be." The two men sat across the desk from each other for a moment longer. Then the general stood up. So did David. They shook hands again. "Sergeant, get to work." "Yes, sir." David walked out of the office, down the long corridor, out into the morning sun. He had work to do. The next 6 weeks were the hardest weeks of his civilian life, and the most alive he had felt in 11 years. He worked 16-hour days. He met with curriculum designers. He met with senior officers, some of whom were skeptical, some of whom were openly hostile, some of whom he was surprised to find were grateful. He stood in front of rooms full of colonels and made the case again and again for a kind of training that didn't yet exist. He took notes when they pushed back. He listened. He revised. He did not raise his voice once. He came home every night to a small apartment in Crystal City where his daughter was waiting for him, usually with a drawing she had made at her new school, usually with a story about her new friend Maya, who had a hamster named Oreo. He read Charlotte's Web to her. They finished it together on a Tuesday night in November, and Lily cried at the end, the way every child cries at the end of Charlotte's Web. "Daddy, why did Charlotte have to die?" "Because she was old baby, and because she'd done what she came to do. She'd saved her friend." "That's like Hector, right like the man you told the general about." David sat very still. "Yeah, Lily, that's like Hector." "Daddy, are you going to die saving your friends?" He turned to her, and he took her small face in his hands, and he said with all the certainty of a man who had finally figured out what he was here for, "No, baby, I'm not. I already did the saving part. Now I'm gonna do the teaching part. That's a different job. Promise." "I promise, Lily Bear." She nodded. She closed her eyes. She fell asleep within 2 minutes, her hand still wrapped around his thumb. The pilot program launched in the spring. 12 students in the first cohort, 6 junior officers, 6 senior NCOs. They lived together for 10 weeks at Fort Bragg in a building David had personally walked through 3 times before approving the design. The program was called the Holloway-Lopez Initiative. David had insisted on the name. He'd called Maria Lopez before he proposed it. She had wept on the phone.
一首在
The first graduation ceremony was held on a Friday morning in June. David stood at the podium in his civilian suit. Lily sat in the front row in a navy blue dress with white stars on it. Yes, the same dress, the one she'd worn to meet General Price. Only now it was a little snug at the shoulders because she'd grown 2 inches since October. Lieutenant General Holloway sat next to her. Brigadier General Catherine Price sat on the other side. Maria Lopez had flown in from Texas with her 2 boys, who were now 12 and 14. Both of them tall and serious and dark-eyed like their father. And David spoke for 10 minutes. He didn't read from notes. He didn't quote anyone famous. He just said what he'd been thinking about for 40 years. "When I joined the Army in 2002, he said, "I was 19 years old. I didn't know what I was doing. I was scared. I made mistakes. I was lucky enough, and I do mean lucky, to be assigned to a senior sergeant named Hector Lopez, who was patient enough to teach me without breaking me. He listened to me when I was wrong. He corrected me without humiliating me. He told me once when I was 20 years old and very full of myself, Jefe, the difference between a good soldier and a dead one is 1 hour of listening." He paused. "I never forgot that. Hector died in 2014. I have spent the last decade trying to figure out how to honor him. I've tried in a lot of ways. None of them worked. None of them until last October, when a lieutenant in a supply depot in Colorado called my uniform a costume and a brigadier general happened to walk in at exactly the wrong moment for that lieutenant and exactly the right moment for me." A laugh moved through the audience. "That lieutenant is sitting in this room today. His name is Captain Michael Carver. Yes, Captain. Now I'll get to that, and he has graduated with distinction from the first class of this program. He is a better officer than he was a year ago. He is, more importantly, a better man. And the reason he is a better officer and a better man is that he learned how to listen. To his sergeants. To the men and women under his command. To the people who know more than he does, which, as it turns out, is most of the people he meets on most of the days he meets them." Another laugh. Carver in the third row was smiling and shaking his head. "Ladies and gentlemen, the lesson of the Holloway-Lopez Initiative is one lesson. Listen, that's it. Everything else we teach is just a way of getting you to do that one thing. Listen to your soldiers. Listen to your sergeants. Listen to your lieutenants. Listen to the man with the patch you don't recognize. Because there is a chance, a real chance, that he knows something that will save your life." David's voice didn't break, but it got very quiet. Lieutenant General Holloway lost his son because 2 good people in a difficult situation did not listen to each other for the 30 seconds it would have taken to coordinate a single decision. Maria Lopez lost her husband because of a war. But the work he did before he died, the soldiers he saved, the men he made better, that came from his ability to listen. Hector Lopez listened. That is why I am alive. That is why a lot of us are alive. He looked out at the room. "Class of 2026, you are the first. There will be more after you. But you are the first. Carry this work forward. Listen to each other. Take care of each other. Bring each other home." The room was very quiet. Then someone in the back stood up. It was Lieutenant, now Captain Vasquez. The young woman who had spent 22 minutes in a firefight in Syria. The young woman David had told to go to medical, who had gone to medical, who had in his classroom one afternoon told him she was doing better. She had transferred to the Holloway-Lopez program as a student with David's full blessing. She came to attention. She saluted. Then one by one every officer in the room stood up. Then every NCO. Then every civilian. And at the very front in the front row, an 8-year-old girl in a navy blue dress with white stars stood up too, very seriously, and copied the salute the best she could with her small hand at her brow. David Hartley looked out at the room, at his daughter, at the Lopez boys, at Maria, at General Price, at Lieutenant General Holloway, at the men and women he had taught and the men and women they would teach, and he felt finally, completely, and without reservation, that he was home. He returned the salute, and that night, back at the small house they had kept in Colorado, they had decided in the end to keep both places splitting time between Washington and Colorado. As the work required, David sat on the front porch with Lily. The same porch where 8 months earlier he had sat with her and held her hand and told her, "Lily Bear, I need to talk to you about something." A lot had happened since then. His mother had come to the graduation. She had sat next to Maria Lopez, and the two women had talked the whole flight back to Texas, where Maria was now teaching at a community college, and where David's mother had a sister-in-law she hadn't visited in 10 years. She had stayed an extra week. She had called David from Texas and told him in her quiet voice, "David, I haven't laughed this much since your father was alive." Lieutenant Carver. Captain Carver now had been assigned as a junior instructor in the second cohort of the program. He had asked personally for the assignment. David had recommended him for it. The two of them now had a standing weekly phone call every Monday at 10 in the morning to talk about whatever came up. The Distinguished Service Cross was no longer on the dresser. David had loaned on the condition that he could ask for it back to the small museum at Fort Bragg, where it now sat in a glass case as part of an exhibit about the Holloway-Lopez initiative. Beneath it was a small placard. The placard had 3 names on it: Hector Lopez, Daniel Holloway, David Hartley. David had asked them to put his name last. They had agreed. Now on the porch, Lily was leaning against him. The crickets were going. The sun had gone down. Somewhere in the neighborhood a dog was barking. A father and a daughter on an ordinary summer evening in a town that hadn't changed in any meaningful way despite everything that had happened. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby." "Are you happy?" David thought about it. He could have given a quick answer. He had spent a lot of his life giving quick answers, but he didn't. He took the question seriously, the way Lily took every question seriously, and he sat with it for a long minute before he spoke. "Lily Bear, you know what I think I am. I think I'm happier than I've ever been. Even though Mommy's not here. Even though Mommy's not here. How can you be happy without Mommy?" David put his arm around her shoulder. He pulled her in close. "Baby, listen. Mommy isn't gone. She's in you. She's in the way you laugh. She's in the way you look at me when you're trying to figure out if I'm telling the truth. She's in your handwriting. She's in the way you eat the crusts off your sandwiches before you eat the middle, even though I keep telling you that's backwards." Lily giggled. "Mommy did that too. Mommy did that exactly." "I didn't know. Now you know." She was quiet for a while. "Daddy, are you proud of yourself?" David looked up at the stars. He didn't answer right away. "Lily, I'm going to tell you something. For a long time, for a really long time, I wasn't proud of myself. I thought I had to hide who I'd been. I thought if I told people what I'd done, they wouldn't understand it. And if they did understand it, they'd be afraid of me. I thought my old uniform was a costume baby, the way that lieutenant said. I really did believe that, for 11 years. What changed? And you did. You changed it. You drew that picture, baby, the hero with the shaky red letters. You drew that picture, and you didn't even know what I'd done, and you still drew it. You believed it before there was any reason to believe it. And then a couple of weeks later, the general told you, and you weren't surprised. You weren't surprised, Lily. You looked at me, and you said I knew it." His voice was soft. "Son, that's when it changed. I'm proud of myself, baby. Because my daughter saw who I was before I could see it myself. And once I saw what she saw, I couldn't unsee it anymore. Lily wrapped both arms around his middle. Daddy, I love you. I love you too, Lily. They sat there for a long time. After a while, David said, Lily Bear, I want to show you something. He stood up. He went into the house. He came back out with a small object in his hand. It was a folded piece of construction paper. The crayon drawing, the hero with the yellow sun, the shaky red letters. He sat back down beside her. Baby, I'm going to put this in a frame. I'm going to hang it on the wall of my office in Washington, right above my desk, so that every time I sit down to do my work, I'll see it. I'll see what you saw. Lily looked at the drawing. Daddy, I drew that when I was little. You drew it when you were 8. Lily, you're 9 now. I'm a much better artist now. David laughed a real laugh from his belly, the kind he hadn't laughed in a very long time. I'm sure you are, baby. But this one's special. This one's the one that started it all. She leaned her head against his shoulder. The crickets kept going. The stars came out. A neighbor turned on a porch light somewhere down the street. The world very slowly settled into night, and David Hartley sat on his porch with his daughter, with the picture she had made him in his hand, with the breeze moving through the trees, and he let himself finally, completely without apology, feel proud of who he had been, of who he was now, of who he was still going to be. 25 miles away, in the office of a Brigadier General at Fort Carson, a child's crayon drawing of a man in green clothes with a yellow sun overhead still sat in the center of a desk where it had sat for 8 months. A soldier passing through the office that very evening on temporary duty from another command paused to look at it. He turned to the receptionist sergeant. Sergeant, what's that drawing? The sergeant, who had heard the general tell the story to dozens of visitors over the months, stood up and said the same thing he always said. That, sir, is what a hero looks like, through the eyes of his little girl. The visiting soldier looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, and he straightened his uniform, and he walked out. A long way away, on a porch in a small town in Colorado, David Hartley kissed the top of his daughter's head and looked up at the night sky. He had spent 11 years hiding from himself. He had spent 11 years believing his own story was something to be packed away in a cedar chest in a garage, alongside a folded flag and a bundle of letters from a wife he had loved more than he had known how to say. He had spent 11 years convinced that the man he had been was not the man he was allowed to be anymore. He had been wrong. He had been wrong about that for 11 years. But he was not wrong anymore. The man who had carried Hector Lopez 2 kilometers under fire because Hector's boys needed to bury their father. That man was the same man who now sat on a porch and held his daughter's hand. The man who had extracted 17 American hostages from places nobody wanted to talk about. That man was the same man who now read Charlotte's Web to a 9-year-old girl who insisted on hearing every chapter at least twice. The man with the medal in the glass case at Fort Bragg? That man was the same man who packed crustless sandwiches every morning and washed them down at the end of the day in a sink that had a leaky faucet he had been meaning to fix for 2 months. He was all of those men. He had always been all of those men. He just hadn't known how to be all of them at the same time. Now he did. And so on a summer night in Colorado, with the stars wheeling slowly overhead, and the crickets singing in the grass, and his daughter falling asleep against his shoulder with a crayon drawing in her hands, David Hartley closed his eyes, and he was at peace. The lieutenant in the supply depot had been wrong about the costume. It was never a costume. It was him. It had always been him. And from that day forward, from that day and every day after, David Hartley wore who he was without apology, without hiding, without shame. He taught the young officers how to listen. He raised his daughter into a young woman who would one day look at the framed drawing above his desk and know exactly what it had cost, and exactly what it had given back. He never hid again. Not for himself, not for his daughter, not for the memory of the men he had carried home, or the man whose son he had never met, but whose name he carried into every classroom for the rest of his working life. David Hartley. Single father, retired Sergeant First Class holder of the Distinguished Service Cross, founder of the Holloway Lopez Initiative, finally fully and forever came home. And he stayed there,